Welcome to The Digital Footprint, a podcast for leaders in healthcare, public health, and education who are looking to leverage technology to solve problems and make a big impact. In each episode, we interview innovators and entrepreneurs who are solving the most challenging problems facing these industries. Join us as we dig into the colossal tasks involved in bringing a new digital product to life. Welcome to The Digital Footprint.
Hello. Welcome to The Digital Footprint. I'm Richard Sims, and this podcast is brought to you by Tyrannosaurus Tech, an award-winning technology partner dedicated to designing and developing high-impact software products. Today, I am joined by Brenton Strine, director and founder of Refcode. Welcome, Brenton.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for welcoming me. Welcome to our viewers.
Yeah, very glad to have you on the show. So we've known each other for a few years now. It's always been great catching up with you and hearing how things are progressing with Refcode. It seems like, especially in the last few years, you've really doubled down. There's been a lot of exciting developments. So I'm excited to hear more about what you're doing, and really thrilled that you could make the time to do this. So to get started, do you mind just briefly introducing yourself? Tell us just a little bit about Refcode.
Yeah, so my name is Brenton Strine, and I'll say I've had a career in software engineering. Another way I could put it is I've been coding for something like 20 years, most of those as an enterprise software engineer for millions or more users. And only 5 of those years of experience are still relevant just because of the speed at which things change in this industry. But yeah, I'm self-taught, and I landed a job kind of almost by accident out of college as a web developer. And it changed the trajectory of my life, really. And I've been interested in teaching. And so I bounced around from different places. I've been in California most of my life. I worked at Amazon, NASA, and came to Atlanta and worked at MailChimp. Those are the ones you probably heard of. But when I came to Atlanta, I learned about Clarkston, which is, I had no idea, a resettlement site for the UN. So there have been people that the UN has been placing here in Clarkston, which is just part of Atlanta, really, a little town right outside of Atlanta, for decades. I'm not even sure when they started doing this. But so there's people from all over the world right here in Atlanta, in Clarkston, and many of them are refugees. Technically, there's a difference between a refugee and other types of immigrants, but displaced people. And I was very, very excited to find out that these people are here bringing their, culture and their flavor and all of the cool things that come from all those different cultures being here. And oftentimes they have distinguished backgrounds and careers that were interrupted for one reason or another. Almost always not their fault. Really always not their fault. And they're having to start over because legal degrees and engineering certifications and bar exams don't really translate across international borders always, especially if you are fleeing for your life and you don't have time to go through your filing cabinet on your way out. So they're starting over. And so it just seemed like I felt the pain of that. And I saw the opportunity of these really smart people ready to start over who already have, established themselves in a career. And so I just saw the opportunity of code. So started Refcode after many conversations with people. And Refcode is exactly, the goal is not just to get refugees and immigrants a job, but actually to help them start a new career in software engineering and experience what I experienced, which is a change in the trajectory that you would have expected. For me, coming out of poverty and a family that wasn't educated, software engineering changed the trajectory you would have expected for me. And a lot of people expect refugees to kind of have this, at least economically and employment-wise, future that's not very great. And I want to see that change. So Refcode does that through classes, education, mentorship, and mostly community, and some other exciting things that I'm sure we'll get into.
Awesome. Yeah, I love what you all are doing. So let's jump in with a big question. You touched on this a little bit, but I want to kind of dig in on just the heart of your mission. So I think, you don't have to be a news junkie to know there are a lot of ongoing refugee crises in the world.
Right.
And certainly now with the war in Ukraine, it is especially top of mind for a lot of folks. But more broadly, this has been going on throughout history. It's a complex problem, to say the least. You mentioned, the challenge of coming, obviously your credentials not translating for being easy to leverage here, et cetera. But I'd love to just expand, since you're working really hands-on with a lot of these folks, like the struggle of coming somewhere new is just multifaceted, I'm sure. So
Yeah.
can you expand a little bit more, like based on all your exposure to just all the challenges that refugees would face coming into Atlanta or anywhere in the US, really?
Yeah. I mean, I think that probably everybody has an intuitive sense of some of the challenges of, I mean, just imagine that you drop everything and go
Hmm.
somewhere else and you don't even know where you're going. That's something that I learned about refugees is it's not like they choose to come to the United States. They flee for their lives, land in a refugee camp, and then the UN puts them somewhere, sometimes without, with only a couple of weeks of notice. So it's not like they can
Hmm.
even start learning the language or anything. So there's a lot of challenges. I mean, language is probably one of the first and biggest ones. The complete starting over, even if you do have skills that are valuable, doctors, lawyers, judges, civil engineers, these are all professions where those skills may be valuable, but you would have to start over. You'd have to go through another 8 years of school to become a medical doctor again, And so that just, you really are starting from ground zero on that. There's, and I don't even know if I am qualified to go into the aspects of just being in a different culture, a different society with
Hmm.
having to learn new expectations of just how to interact with people on a basic level. And then, racism, a lot of people don't have white skin. They're coming into
Hmm.
America where racism exists. But a lot of what I see is, and this is a motivation in Refcode, is isolation.
Hmm.
You come from somewhere where you've got family and connections and you've been building a network. You come to a new place and you don't have that network. And a lot of refugees do build strong, small, like sort of like local networks.
Hmm.
So for example, the Ethiopian community is really strong and active in Clarkston. And you talk to Ethiopians and they all seem to know each other. They've got a really strong community, but a lot of these communities are sort of like insulated. So
Hmm.
they connect with people because they need to connect, but that doesn't necessarily give them the connections outside of that community. And so connections lead to employment. That's professional connections. That's finding out about opportunities. That's knowing somebody who can teach you the right thing or point you in the right direction. And so that's one of the disadvantages that I think refugees have,
Hmm.
especially as they're newer and as they haven't had time to make connections, that really puts them at a big disadvantage to somebody like me. If I've been here, for years and years and years, even if my connections are kind of dispersed around, I know how to ask around to get help to figure out
Hmm.
what job to apply for or what job to think about studying for and preparing for, or, opportunities that might come up. And those aren't necessarily available if everybody is also somebody who's new to the country.
Hmm. Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think I would struggle if you just dropped me into another major US city with, essentially nothing but the clothes on my back. So I can't imagine, a whole new culture and just completely different system and society. So that makes a lot of sense. So you talked a little bit about how you got exposed to the problem here in Atlanta. Tell me a little bit more about, what led you to really want to personally take action. There's a big gap there, right? You might have said, "Oh, wow, that's a really difficult situation," and done nothing. You might have just looked for an organization where you could volunteer here and there, but you've really gone a lot further, obviously, to set up Refcode and really build something. So tell us a little bit more about how you got there to kind of take that leap.
Yeah, I think I can answer that by kind of reflecting on two sort of aspects of my personality. The one I already touched on, just kind of my background is, I was raised in a family that was not educated. Looking back, I realized we were in poverty, although I didn't ever think of it that way at the time. I didn't formally study this and I didn't even pursue becoming a software engineer intentionally, but it was just something I was interested in. So it has the power to change your economic trajectory.
Hmm.
And importantly, in that it doesn't require you to kind of be rich to get into it. You don't have
Hmm.
to go to law school or become, go through 8 years of medical school. You can just, if you have a computer and an internet connection, you can teach yourself. If you have some additional resources being like time and interest and mentorship and community but the tools are like the learning resources are free online. So
Hmm.
it's an amazing opportunity. And so when I reflect on my own life and how this changed me, I just see this as a really particularly useful thing for making the world more equitable. It's a job that pays really, really well, and it doesn't have a huge barrier to entry. You don't have to go to Harvard to become a software engineer and be paid successfully. So that's one big thing. And the other thing is that I think maybe partly because I never studied computer science formally, I've always been interested in teaching it. Maybe part of me has been trying to make up for not getting the education I should have. And so I've been, I kind of have a heart of a teacher, and I'm always thinking about ways to explain things. And for years, I've been trying out different sort of strategies for teaching in a non-traditional way. So I did Skillshare. I was actually one of the pilot online Skillshare classes. They used to be in person, and I did that as well. I did one of the early Code Academy lessons. I was part of their code year. I've done like in-person workshops. I've done big workshops. I almost was going to start a boot camp back when boot camps were the latest and greatest thing, although I was far under-resourced and underqualified at that time to succeed there. So I'd been wanting to teach and was excited about this and had been building curriculum in my mind for a long time. So it just kind of, it fit that I had this impulse, and I'd made a lot of mistakes. Like, for example, I did a class on Educator, very similar to like Lynda or even, some of the newer video like Treehouse style things. And I did an intro to HTML, and I made the mistake of kind of just going through the syntax of HTML. In fact, we actually went through the W3C specification, which not even all web developers go through that. And I just went tag to tag, starting with anchor, and just went through and explained every single HTML element all the way to, I think the last one is like WBR alphabetically. And what I learned from that experience of teaching it the wrong way is that there's a lot more to learning to code than learning the syntax. In fact, the syntax is really easy compared to the problem solving and the creativity and the communication and the teamwork and all these other issues. And so when I finally came to, Clarkston and was thinking about helping these refugees, I was looking at other things that already existed because I didn't want to duplicate an effort. And so you mentioned like, why didn't I just volunteer? I actually talked for over a year to different people looking for opportunities like this, and nothing existed that was what needed to exist. There was some computer literacy, and there were some, there's things online where you can teach yourself. There's boot camps, and there's free code camp, and there's all these things, but they were missing community and that opportunity for mentorship and teaching and supporting each other and introducing, because you have to know about free code camp first before you can take advantage of it, right? And they were also missing that whole other realm of what is important to learn beyond just the syntax, all of that other intangible stuff that's even beyond soft skills. There's a whole realm of technical skills that have nothing to do with the code itself that you need to learn. And nothing existed in Clarkston that gave people what they needed. And so I had to start it myself.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great story. And I love that you went through that process, as you said, of having engineering really change the trajectory of your life. And I think that's such a real thing. I've certainly seen it with, folks that are breaking into tech or junior engineers that really put in the time, the energy, and just a few years down the road, they're in a totally different situation in their life and the opportunities before them. So I love that. And you're right, of course, that the barriers to entry are lower than I guess they've ever been, right? It still requires a tremendous amount of work and buckling down and really investing the mental energy and honing the skill set. But it's all very accessible. Increasingly companies are less concerned about if you have a CS degree, if you have a degree period, all of those things. Especially in today's market where engineers are just in such high demand. It's if you have the skills and can demonstrate that, you're in, right?
Yeah.
So with Refcode, where it is now as compared to the initial vision and how you got started, like, can you tell me a little bit more about how it's evolved? Because you really started, I think, like 5 years ago, right? But as I mentioned, I think especially in the last few years, you've really beefed it up. So I'd love to understand how it's changed over time.
Yeah. It's amazing how little the vision has changed in some ways, because I started out with very audacious vision. I wanted to change the typical story of the refugee. I wanted people to stop saying, refugees come here and they work for the chicken factory, and that's the typical story. I wanted them to start saying, refugees come here and they become software engineers and they start, tech startups. And this is like our own little Silicon Valley here.
Mm.
That was my initial vision. And so that's transforming an entire landscape of a city. So obviously that was like very, very big. And early on, a lot of factors play into that are far more than one person can do, obviously. But at the beginning, we just started with a simple class that taught code. And I would tell people we're teaching refugees how to code, which is a massive oversimplification. But what I did that was a little bit different is that tagline, we teach refugees to code, was actually a little bit of a trick to pull people in. And then what we actually did was we taught them communication skills and collaboration skills and professional skills and, problem solving and creativity and a lot of other things that gave them an idea of if they had the interest, the aptitude, and the ability to really pursue this. And so the goal of this intro class was we did teach, they learned some amazing technical skills. They built websites from scratch, uploaded it on GitHub, deployed it to a domain in this little 10-week class. But the goal was not that. The goal was for them to know if they were ready to pursue this career and go all in on it. So that in combination with doing it in a way that built their connections to each other, to other refugees, and to established professionals from Atlanta, who, by the way, often were also refugees or immigrants. So with a community to support them and the human, resources that are needed to make that career decision and a little bit of a taste to know, that was what that initial class was, just an introduction. And then early on, that was it. We didn't have anything else. So they would graduate from this class with not even really just a tiny introduction of technical skills, not even anywhere close to where they could be looking for a job yet. But they would have a mentor and they'd have a community and they'd have some direction and some ideas of what the future looked like. And then they would just we'd set them free and they would find their own path. And we always knew that was a problem. Because it's hard to find your own path, but people were succeeding with it, and we've been just trying to build that more and more parts of that path. So we've been watching the sort of journeys that people take and finding the paths that make the most sense, and we've been trying to turn the dirt path into a little sidewalk, and the goal is to turn it into like a 5-lane superhighway and make it really easy to go down that path. But one of the earliest things that really stuck with me, actually, this was after our very first class ever. Mustafa, who was both a student and he helped me run the class, he was like our lab manager. He said, I wish that we could pay students to participate. And that was so key to the struggles that refugees face often, is they're working long hours, often late hours, or even early hours, like very, very early, 3 a.m., 4 a.m. hours, that are taxing jobs to put food on the table. And even though we offer this class for free, we're asking them to take time away from that, take time away from their ability to recover afterwards, take time away from the little time they have to have relationships and, live their lives to study this new thing. And so offering it for free just kind of wasn't good enough. And so I've had this goal for a long time to be able to raise the funds somehow to give them that, to be able to pay like a learn and earn program so that people can actually learn without having to worry about how they're getting food on the table. And so that's been a really exciting thing to be able to see start coming together recently. And also farther down the line, getting connected to actual employment opportunities. Again, like, it's hard to do, and everybody finds their own path, but we've been working towards finding ways to help make those connections.
Yeah, that's awesome. And of course, I love the idea of paying them to be in the class. I'm sure it's not easy to find the resources for that, but of course I understand. I mean, I'm sure many folks who would love to do it and have the most sincere intentions, I mean, the opportunity cost of doing that versus something that has a more immediate pay schedule, very difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
So as far as like the history of Refcode, again, I know you've been at it a while. Fairly recently, you really took the plunge and went full time. And you, of course, were coming from a very successful software engineering path and job. So you're taking a big risk and making a big change. What got you to the point of jumping in full time and kind of being ready to commit at that level?
Yeah. I don't even know if we've mentioned on this call yet, everything that I did until January this year was in addition to my full-time job. I was doing it on the sides, nights and weekends and stuff. And so this was something that I always knew I wanted to be big, but it grew kind of faster than I was ready for. I would tell people about it and people would jump in and say, hey, I want to help. And so suddenly we had a bunch of volunteers and we kind of expanded from a class into multiple programs really, really quickly. And I always had the human capital available to almost like anything I could dream up, we could do it as long as it didn't cost money. We had like infinite human resources, but no money. And so with that rapid expansion, I was seeing, wow, there's so many possibilities here. But also I was building these relationships with people, with students. And, they'd go through the class, but then they'd come back and volunteer. So I was having multiple year-long relationships develop, really meaningful relationships. A lot of the people that started out as just a student in one of my classes are now somebody that I consider a legitimate close friend. And so when you start building those relationships and caring about the people, that's our trick is volunteers come thinking they'll just help out once or twice, and then they meet somebody and make a connection and then they're hooked. Well, I was in it deeper than anybody else. And so this became kind of like the primary focus and passion for my life over the years. And I wanted to do this full time, but it's really hard because again, we weren't working with like a real big budget. We are partnering with like, for example, Tecton to use their venue. So we had these strategic partnerships so we could use resources, but we weren't like getting grants for like $1 million or anything. We're getting small donations, less than $1,000. So there was no way that I was going to be able to just quit my job and do this full time and get paid for it. And even if I did, it does not look good for a nonprofit to have 100% of their funding go to paying the director and then none of the money go to anything else. So I shot myself in the foot there with building a program that doesn't cost anything to run other than giving my own free time for free, which is very valuable, obviously. But yeah, this is something that I've been working towards for a long time, building up the resources and sort of like starting to think through the ability of maybe someday to grow this to the point that we actually could get grants and legitimate, donations from, places like MailChimp, or I was thinking about Home Depot. And so in January, I did take the plunge. I quit my job and I didn't just quit. I quit without a plan for any income. And I've got some runway to continue working, being financially solvent for a while. Again, thanks to an incredibly, like surprisingly lucrative career that I never planned for, and saving for the ability to do something like this. But as we've been building Refcode out, I'm starting to see ways that we can kind of expand and grow and maybe get it to the point someday where we can pay me for this to be my full-time thing. And actually, my dream even beyond that is for Refcode to mature to the point where it doesn't depend on me. I don't have to be the executive director. If I leave, I want somebody else to be able to step in and say, okay, I'm going to be the executive director now. I'm going to run this and it's going to continue to thrive and serve the refugees and immigrants just as well. And it's not all going to fall apart. And that can't happen if we're expecting that person who follows me to also be 100% volunteer.
Right.
So we have to, in order for this to meet its mission, we have to develop some income stream enough to pay the people who are running it.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, kudos to you for, doubling down on it. And I'm sure it's going to continue to succeed and get to that point where from a financial standpoint, you can build a full-time team and further the mission. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about the programs specifically and the students themselves. So, just looking at your site, you have a pretty extensive set of resources for the students. So actual courses, structured mentorship, like you said, it seems like it's become a lot more than just, kind of one introductory class.
Right.
Can you expand a little bit on the details and, what you're trying to provide from an education standpoint, but also the community aspect, which you've mentioned a few times, and I am sure is instrumental to their success?
Yeah. Well, I can kind of break things into 3 categories. And 2 of those 3 categories are more future looking that don't exist yet. And I think it's kind of interesting that all of the stuff that exists now, I'm now in my mentally grouping into one category, which I'm calling the community category, the Refcode community. And the Refcode community is all of the things that we do that are supported by the community, by volunteers, which are, again, like seasoned professionals from Atlanta, people who are refugees or immigrants who have either come through the program or came, with in their country of origin some previous experience and want to support other refugees and immigrants. And then the refugees and immigrants, the participants themselves. So in that category of community supported events, I mentioned the class, which I sometimes call a discernment class, because again, you do learn a bunch of technical skills. You're learning a bunch of really cool stuff, but the real purpose of it is to discern if you want to do this or not, and if you are able to do this or not. You may be good at math, but not good at creative problem solving. You're not going to succeed as a software engineer unless you can learn that. If you're really motivated, maybe you can learn that. So a lot of it comes down to motivation. And you mentioned the structured mentorship. That's really important for people who are really thinking about moving forward, but there's not a clearly defined path. And they need to make decisions. Do I go to school? Do I do a boot camp? Do I try and build something on my own? We've done some opportunities where we give people real world work to kind of practice collaborating on a team. We call that team code. And so like, for example, the refcode.org website, if you look at it, that was actually built by a team that was it was really fun. It had somebody from every cohort in that team. Cool. And the whole purpose of that was to learn collaboration skills. And so technically, we actually designed it so they could build that website with very simple HTML and CSS. My goal was for them to not learn anything new technically, no new code, because they were struggling just with I was pretty evil. I set them up for so many merge conflicts. It was bad. They really suffered through a lot of every single possible way that teams can go wrong. I forced them to experience. But at the end of it, they came out with, having built a real project that they could put on their resumes and being able to say in an interview, oh yeah, I know how to work myself out of a merge conflict. I know why it's important to structure your PR this way. I know why it's important to announce to the team what you're about to work on and which files and why. So that's a big thing. And then the other things that I'm excited about are the lab, the Refcode lab, which is kind of the same thing as our class, but with no structure in terms of when you have to come and everybody being on the same page. So anybody can come into the lab on Wednesday nights at any level and just go into a room full of people where there's a bunch of other people at different skill levels and get help on anything. So you could come in and work on your PhD level Python thesis, although you might be asked to give help if you're at that level. Right. Or if you come in, because you've gone halfway through a boot camp and you're wanting some help on something, or if you come in asking how to use a mouse and a keyboard, and you spend time both receiving help and giving help. On the early end, you're probably receiving help more, but over time you gain skills and then you start giving help. So I really love the concept of the lab because we don't have to gatekeep entry into the class and we don't have to start everybody on the same day. And if somebody misses because, they have something come up, which happens, your boss says suddenly, oh, you have to come in on this day. You can't say no to that. If you miss a week of the lab, it doesn't matter. So those are some of the programs we have. I'm probably missing like 3 or 4. There's so many different things we do. Like during the pandemic, we ran tech talks because we couldn't meet in person. And so we would have experts present on a different topic like artificial intelligence or no code development. And people would just come and listen and interact and ask questions. So that was another fun thing, another community supported thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it's great, of course, kind of the breadth of things you all have going on. And I 100% understand this reality that it's not strictly about being able to write code. And we kind of go through this too when we're bringing on folks, especially that are more junior level, just running sprints, knowing when you're blocked, when to ask for help, managing all your pull requests, et cetera. Yeah, like you got to hit all of those things to give folks a good chance when they actually come out into the real software engineering world. One question I had for you, for your students, like give us a sense, like what countries are represented? One thing I'm also curious about is, are all your classes in English? To what extent can you really realistically accommodate for a range of languages? Just want to get a sense of like the diversity of the group of students typically.
Yeah, I'll start with the English thing. We only teach in English, although when I teach, I do a pretty good broken English, so I can make things a little bit easier to understand for people who aren't super fluent. But it's actually important, I think, because at least in the Atlanta tech job market, having English is one of the things that's going to make you far more employable than if you don't. And so, I'd love to help everybody. And we could maybe work on some of that down the line. But right now, at least, having English is already a major contributing factor to your success. And so we're requiring English. But I will say that one of the great things about having a community, instead of just like a model where it's just a teacher teaching a bunch of students, if I don't speak Amharic, I can't help. Like and there's like a point that I am not communicating well in English. There's nothing we can do about it. But because we're a community, I may say something confusing and somebody speaking Amharic doesn't understand what I'm saying. Well, there's 2 other people in the class who also speak Amharic maybe, and maybe 2 or 3 of the volunteers also speak Amharic, because it's not like only the Americans are volunteering. It's everybody is kind of collaborating and building each other up. So I see a ton of this happening where the primary communication is in English, but then when something kind of breaks down communication wise, there's little like gatherings that happen where they switch to their native languages and communicate much, much faster. Have you ever seen that meme where the person's like, "You should see how smart I am in Spanish"?
Yes.
Which really, I mean, it's amazing to think that you could be learning something difficult and challenging technically, and also trying to do it in not your native tongue.
Right.
It takes a lot of brain power, right? And so I see that happen where they switch into their native tongue and things suddenly are moving much faster. The communication goes quickly, and then they pop back into English and you're like, okay, we worked through it. So I see that happen a lot. There's diversity. It changes every cohort, it seems like. I think a lot of that is because we recruit a lot from word of mouth. And so like for the very, very first cohort we had people from Syria and Iran, I think, and some other places. I'm forgetting where, somewhere in South America. And then the next cohort, we had 1 person from Ethiopia. And then the cohort after that, almost the entire class was Ethiopian,
Right.
because they told all their friends. And the class we're in right now is, again, a lot of Syrians, people from Iraq. We've got some people from Afghanistan. By the way, the time that it takes for people to get in Clarkston from a, national disaster or a war or something is longer than most people realize. So like, for example, in Ukraine, I don't expect to see many people from Ukraine for a while. It just takes years usually. Actually, the events in Afghanistan earlier were kind of rare because people got over not through refugee status, but through an SIV, special immigration visa, which is kind of this thing that Congress passed that allows them to come over much more quickly. So we actually are seeing people from the American exit of Afghanistan already. And that's very rare for it to happen that quickly. But yeah, we get people from all over the world. Unfortunately, natural disasters and wars and, all the bad things that can happen. There's no one country that has a monopoly on that. So people come from all over the place.
Yeah, very cool. I'm sure you got some really interesting folks, and, especially given how motivated they are to invest and make something new. I'm sure it's really exciting to get to meet some of them. So one thing, we talked a little bit about this earlier, even though software developers are in such high demand, it can be really tough to break into the space because so many companies, even though they're desperate to hire, they want someone who has enough experience to jump right in. Right. So it can be tough to, get over that hurdle. Curious how you all are handling this. If I'm understanding correctly, like recently you've been kind of pursuing more of a small agency internally where folks can start taking on paid development work and start to accrue some of that experience. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing there and what your plans are?
Yeah, definitely. And that goes back to what Mustafa said after that first cohort. I wish that we could pay them. And I've been thinking about that so much for many, many years. And beyond that, even watching the stories and the journeys of people who've gone through and succeeded. For example, one woman, she graduated the class. She didn't have previous experience, but she got introduced to code. She graduated the class, had worked with her mentor, and eventually decided to go get a master's degree in computer science. And so now remember, I don't have even an undergraduate degree in computer science. So she's like outranked me twice in her education level. And she did that, and I was, leveraging my networks to try and help her find a job. And she just couldn't find work because everybody wanted her to have 2 years of experience for the entry level position. And it was just maddening to me, maddening to her, just very, very frustrating. She's super qualified. She has tons of skills. I could vouch, like, she was teaching me things.
Right.
Very, very smart, very talented, very skilled, very educated. She had credentials, but she didn't have experience. And that just really shows, like, you can have everything else in the world, but if you don't have the thing on your resume that says X number of years of experience, it's just hard. And so for her, she was able to eventually get an apprenticeship through a program called Code the Dream. They're in North Carolina. Highly recommend Code the Dream to anybody who wants to participate or donate or volunteer or anything. It's a great program. But that apprenticeship gave her the experience she needed to get her first job. So she went from, in a few years, she went from no experience to a 6-figure total compensation. Her first job was like over 6 figures. Her first real job, awesome. I should say, which is amazing. But man, it shouldn't be that hard. And so, so the model that we're looking at now is we're going to start a dev shop. And because I know the talents and the skills and the motivation of people going through this, we are actually able to hire people and start paying them. We can't pay them, 6 figures, but we can pay them a living wage that means they can quit their other job and focus on learning and developing and gaining experience full time. And so we can hire them as a kind of learn and earn sort of way to move forward. And I actually invented I invented this job description. You've heard of software engineer, and the engineer is the person that has to know the whole overarching picture and solve all the problems of, if you think about building a bridge, they have to know geology and air and weight and the physics of metal, like everything. They have to solve all of it. Versus a technician is somebody who has very strong technical skills in a specific area and doesn't have to integrate all the different parts. So I created this term software technician. And so that means that enables us to hire people at a lower skill level where they just know HTML and JavaScript. They just know the syntax maybe, and they're learning the more engineering principles. And I think that we can actually start to leverage these people in an environment, again, sort of like a community environment where they're receiving mentorship and teaching and growing and learning on the job. But I think that if we do it right, we can actually have them, through this software agency, contribute enough that they pay for their own weight, if that makes sense, even at the very, very low level. And that's really hard to do. I mean, it's why most companies want 2 years of experience. And so the goal is that they start as a software technician 1 and really quickly level up to software technician 2 and 3, and then get promoted to software engineer 1, 2, 3, and then Google will poach them and quadruple their salary.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So let me take a step back for a second. I shared with you, we started this podcast mostly to, folks that are considering launching a startup or a new nonprofit or building out some type of tech product, specifically in healthcare, education. We're hoping to give them kind of insights into that journey, the highs, the lows, the struggles. What have been some of the biggest challenges you've faced with Refcode, and how have you either overcome those, or maybe you're still in the midst of sorting them out, but what's been the toughest part so far?
Yeah, I think the toughest part is that I took on a very audacious task. I mean, basically trying to solve things that, think about it. There are a lot of people who, like, you could make a lot of money if you can find a way to train untalented people in a highly desirable skill set.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are working on this. Like, you have to know that there are many, many, many smart people trying to figure this out, because there's tons of money in it for whoever figures it out first. You can, start a recruiting firm and become the next billionaire. And so I'm taking on a task that's just hard.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't something where, if we just bring a bunch of volunteers together and teach some code, that this is magically going to do this good in the world. It's not a matter of like, we need more effort. It's a matter of there actually needs to be some serious innovation to solve some real problems that nobody has solved yet. Because if somebody has solved it, we would all know about it. At a higher level, if we can crack this challenge, we're going to make the whole world more equitable. So that's really valuable, and it's just hard to do that. That's been a big challenge, is just the magnitude of what we're taking on. I think that the magnitude of that has been hard, but that's been balanced by the magnitude of support that we've received. So many people willing to give their time So it's not like we had to raise, a venture fund of like $1 million in order to experiment with something that may or may not work. We were able to have people give their time for free and build a community and watch the success of people and adjust and make changes and build something that worked that way. So I'm very grateful for all the time that people have given to build this community and help us work through this daunting challenge. And I'm not saying we're there yet, but the way that people have come together has made this even possible.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, it's kind of almost impossible. I was talking to somebody who had started a software agency, and they were saying, yeah, teaching people is really hard. Starting a software agency is hard. Starting a nonprofit is hard. You're trying to do all of those at once. That's like
Yeah.
compounding the difficulties of what you're working with. But the fact that so many people recognize the scope and the magnitude and the impact of this problem has been an asset. And
Yeah.
we've been able to, it's almost like if you tell people that we're working on a solution, people come together to make that solution possible.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And yeah, I think it's a big, challenging goal, which I think a lot of the best, startups or nonprofits or whatever it is are based on something big and kind of audacious like that. So I definitely give you props for going for it. And of course, I know firsthand what the potential is there, given how the talent market is in the tech space. And that's the disconnect there, just supply and demand has been getting further and further apart for years and years and years. So it's not a short-term problem.
Yeah.
And of course, I agree that it's not simply a matter of putting money towards it or, resources or human capital. Like there does have to be a lot of creativity there because, as we know, there's a lot of really well-funded boot camps and stuff that have degrees of success, of course. But even a lot of folks coming out of those boot camps, even a lot of folks coming out of a true CS degree, they're not quite there where they can just readily jump in and start down that true career path. So it's tough.
I have to say too, as you were talking, I just thought an even bigger challenge, probably the biggest challenge of all of this is my own limitations. And I'm not just like trying to be humble. I've spent my career as a software engineer. I've not spent my career as like a director of a program or a CEO. And so in order for Refcode to succeed, we have to work in this big space. And I think about things like corporate partnerships to set up our participants with apprenticeships or get grants. So that there's a lot of big things that if I had a different background, Refcode could have been a lot more successful at. And even, people might say, well, you could grow a board and you can get advisors. Well, I don't know how to do all that stuff. I've had to learn, I've had to learn all of this. So I've been learning and growing with Refcode to try and give it what it deserves. And it just takes time to develop and grow in so many ways personally. And luckily as a software engineer, I'm used to learning and growing. So I'm able to do that, but it feels painfully slow sometimes. And that's been really challenging, just my own limitations and seeing how, I've seen a boot camp they like guarantee all of their graduates jobs at Fortune 500s. And I'm like, how do they do that? And then I look at who's involved and they're all CEOs and like successful startup founders and all this. And they're like, well, of course they're going to be able to have the connections and the leverage to, make that happen. And I don't. So
yeah, for sure. But yeah, I think the good thing, of course, you are humble more than you should be because you've accomplished a lot, but also, it just takes time. And I think that the good thing, as much as you understandably are eager to make as big of an impact as possible, as soon as possible, is this, this problem, unfortunately, is not going away, right?
Yeah.
And whether it takes 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, if you get there, it's going to be really transformative. So I think just stick to it. So my last question, what advice would you give to someone who's kind of in the early stages of launching a new business or a nonprofit? Kind of if you knew them, what you know now, like what advice would you share?
It's the same advice that I would give to myself when I was in high school and I started teaching myself to code. And it's the same advice I give to our students who are starting out, which is don't do it on your own. Get mentors and advisors and get plugged into a community that will support you and help you. It took me 8 years to learn how to code before I got my job. it did not need to take me 8 years. It was because I had nobody directing me or helping me, telling me I was going down the wrong path. And if you have a community supporting you that can redirect you, show you your weak spots, show you opportunities that you wouldn't have found on your own, that helps. I think that's just across the board helpful in everything. But, as I've grown as a leader and somebody who's actually running an organization, finding that support from other people who have been there before me and are farther along the path, and people who are in a similar path as me as well, and people who are a little bit below, not just getting help from people above you down, but being part of a cohesive community all around. So you're giving help to other people and advice, which helps you. In order to explain something, you have to understand it yourself, and you see people have different problems than you do. And so you see new things to learn about, and you have mentors who are above you who can help. So just being a part of as much of a community of people who are in the same space as you as possible and can support you in it is the advice I would give, especially when you're in a place where, like me, where you're trying to grow into the shoes that you have found yourself in, or the shoes that you're hoping to step into.
Well, that's great advice. I think, of course, it's very true. And I do feel like, fortunately, in Atlanta especially, I think a lot of people want to help, if you're willing to ask and kind of give them a place to get plugged in. So that's great. Okay, so looks like, we're about out of time. This has been great. Thank you so much, Brenton. Really appreciate you coming on. So before we sign off, where can listeners go to connect with you, learn more about Refcode, and what specifically can they do to support your mission?
Yeah, you can go to refcode.org. We did not buy the .com. Somebody made that mistake recently. Refcode.org has tons of information about ways to plug in. If you're close to Atlanta and want to come in person, we would love to have volunteers across the board, all kinds of volunteers, even with not a lot of technical knowledge. We have roughly 2 volunteers for every student, sometimes 3 per student in our classes. Oh, wow. And all of our programs moving forward are very community-based. So come and volunteer and join our community, be a part of it. You will grow more than you realize, and you will find that you are enjoying it rather than just feeling like you're giving. Also, you might expect me to say donate, but what we really need is big donations. So it would be great, it'd be great if somebody logs on, and you can donate $100 or whatever. But I'm trying to figure out how to get, some big company to give us $1 million, which has not happened yet. So if you have strategic partnerships or, some sort of professional connection, and that they care about something like this and they might want to help in a big way, that would be amazing. Think about your personal network. Maybe you know somebody who knows somebody, and reach out through, I think we've got a form where you can reach out on our website. And you can donate if you want to. That's very appreciated, but we are in a place where we're starting to raise money to support people going through a boot camp. We didn't even mention we're starting a boot camp.
Awesome.
And we're hoping that it'll be actually a residency. So they will not only come and take this boot camp for free, but they'll get paid a living stipend while they do it. And that's going to be 100% supported by donations. So donations will definitely help. But even more valuable than donations is the right strategic connection.
Right. Very cool. Well, we will spread the word and appreciate everything you're doing. It's awesome. And thanks again for being on the Digital Footprint.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It was great to talk to you. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Brenton.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Digital Footprint. This show is brought to you by Tyrannosaurus Tech, an award-winning technology partner dedicated to designing and developing high-impact software products. If you like what you heard in this episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For show notes and access to all episodes, please visit tyrannosaurustech.com/blog. Digital Footprint.